What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and I'm pretty pumped for today's video because for the first time this offseason, I'm going to be diving into the 2025 rookie class with the NFL Combine go down this past weekend, Friday for the tight ends. And I just think this is such a unique year in rookie drafts, specifically in the first round. So in today's video, I'm going to be going through my first round rankings, pretty much like my top 12, splitting these guys up into different tiers. Maybe going like 13, 14 deep for guys that are like kind of in the final mix there for like late round one, early round two. But typically at this point in the offseason, there are like some general consensus tiers on where certain guys are going to go. This year, like outside of the 101, which spoiler alert, the vast majority of drafts is going to be Ashton Jeanty. Outside of Jeanty, there is pretty much like little to no consensus with the rest of these guys. Like someone that I might have as my 102, 103, that might be someone else's like 107, 108, 109. There are so many different positions that you could be choosing between with every pick you have. So I think this will be fun. And let's just dive right into it here. We're going to be starting off with my 101, my number one overall player, my only guy in tier one. I kind of buried the lead, but obviously it's going to be Ashton Jeanty, running back out of Boise State. He's just an all-around great running back. Had obviously just the monster 2024. He's great after contact, 5.25 yards after contact per attempt in 2024. 53% of his runs were on breakaway plays, 15-plus yard runs, which is great to see. He forces missed tackles, 152 of them in 2024. And then if you were going to like try to poke a hole in his 2024 season, you would say, all right, the rushing production was great. The receiving work wasn't quite there. But then all you have to do is look back to 2023, and that's totally in his bag. He was targeted 48 times, caught 44 of them for 578 receiving yards. He had over a 3 yards per route run, which is just insane for a running back. He's a round one lock, looking like he's probably going to be going top 15 in the NFL draft. I would be shocked if I have anyone other than Ashton Jeanty as my 101, even post NFL draft when it comes to my rookie picks. Now, my number two, and starting off tier two, I think this is really where you could go in a bunch of different directions. I think you could make a case for a guy like Cam Ward here. I think you could make a case for a wide receiver. I'm going to go to the running back position again, and I'm going to have TreVeyon Henderson here. It seems like he's starting to get some of that round one hype. I think it was Daniel Jeremiah. He had him going in round one in his most recent mock draft. He has the 3-down skill set. Doesn't necessarily have that 3-down workhorse size. He's 5'10", 202 pounds, but he is a great pass catcher, which obviously you love for fantasy. He is a capable blocker, tested very well at the combine, had a 9.45 relative athletic score. He's a big play machine. 54% of his rushing yards came on 15-plus yard runs, has the breakaway speed, great acceleration. I've seen some people comparing him to Jahmyr Gibbs. Don't think he's quite as good as Jahmyr Gibbs, especially when it comes to like making guys miss in the open field. Don't think he's quite that shifty or elusive, but I think if you're looking at like a Jahmyr Gibbs type role in the NFL, I think that would be an ideal situation for TreVeyon Henderson, where you'd still like him to obviously be leading the backfield, maybe even more so than a guy like Jahmyr Gibbs is, but it would be nice if he had like that early down guy, someone who could take some of the work when you're in between the 20s, and then really let TreVeyon Henderson just feast in the pass game, have that big play upside. So he is going to be my number two player here. Now, if he's going in round two and some of these other running backs are getting round one capital, then I would definitely move him back. But at this point, it seems like he has a decent shot to go round one. Certainly some interesting landing spots in that range. So Henderson is going to be my number two at this point. Then at number three, also in tier two, going to go to my first wide receiver. And this is where I have Tetairoa McMillan. He's pretty clearly my wide receiver one at this point. Out of Arizona, he broke out as a true freshman, 39 receptions for 702 yards and 8 touchdowns. He had back-to-back monster sophomore and junior seasons. Great ball skills, 5.3% career drop rate, caught 55% of his contested opportunities in his last 2 seasons. He is a huge wide receiver, 6'4", 220-ish. Pretty elusive after the catch given his size. He actually doubled his missed tackles force from 2023 to 2024. A couple weeks ago, I would have felt pretty confident that he was going somewhere in the top 10. Seems like that's cooled off a little bit. Not saying he's not going top 10, but maybe, a more reasonable floor is like top 15-ish. I still expect him to be the first, clear wide receiver off the board. Obviously, Travis Hunter, we don't really know what to make of that situation. But Tet McMillan is going to be my wide receiver 1, and I feel pretty good about him. Now, my number 4 player here, also in tier 2, it's going to be Omarion Hampton, running back out of North Carolina. This dude's a freak athlete. Came in huge, 5'11", 221 pounds at the combine, had a 9.93 relative athletic score, both ran and jumped very well. 4.47 at that size is pretty awesome. He's a physical runner, has great contact balance, not someone who's overly elusive or shifty, but still able to rip off, big plays. Definitely a capable pass catcher, has reliable hands, 2 drops on 80 targets. Not someone who's going out like running a super advanced route tree, but he is an absolute tank in pass protection. I think he's definitely someone who has the size and ability to earn a 3-down role in the NFL. And he is getting a ton of round 1 hype. In Daniel Jeremiah's recent mock draft, he had him going number 22 to the Chargers, which would obviously be an amazing fit. Mel Kiper had him going number 12 in his most recent mock draft to the Cowboys. That would also be amazing. He's getting that round 1 hype. Getting paired with either of those offenses would be amazing. I have him in my top 4. Now, moving over to the 5th and final player that I have here in tier 2, it's going to be the first quarterback. It is Cam Ward out of Miami. I think in general, the quarterback situation this year is very interesting because it's obviously a very weak quarterback class, but Cam Ward sitting here is the potential number 1 pick. At the time that I'm recording this, we're hearing like teams are trying to trade into that number 1 spot to lock him down, as the QB1. And like a quarterback going number 1 in any class, should be picked very highly in rookie drafts. And if you were to take him as high as like the 102, I don't think that's a crazy pick. When it comes to like me evaluating quarterbacks, I'm not going to come out here and make like huge swings on like, oh, I'm in or out on this guy. I'm going to go pretty in line with how the NFL views these guys. So if the NFL is high on Cam Ward, I'm going to be in on him for fantasy. It was the same thing last year, right? Like some people were completely out on Bo Nix or completely out on Michael Penix. If the NFL and these teams are telling me they view them as like top 10 or top 12 picks and they're going to be the starters, then I'm going to be willing to draft them in fantasy. I guess where I kind of put my input in is just how much upside I think they have given their skill set. So a guy like Cam Ward, I do think he's fairly capped upside-wise just due to the lack of elite rushing production, right? He's been between 300 and 400 rushing yards in his last 3 seasons. He's not going to be a guy with like the Jane Daniels, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen level rushing upside. I think best case scenario, you're probably looking at like a Patrick Mahomes type where you're like just hoping he can get to like 300 yards, 3, 4, 5 touchdowns. Like that's probably the peak rushing upside for a guy like Cam Ward. There have certainly been a lot of comparisons with Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders this year to the quarterbacks last year, guys like JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix, Michael Penix. And it seems like the general consensus is like Cam Ward would be somewhere in like that Bo Nix, Penix range, just in terms of like their ability as prospects. And it's interesting because when you were drafting those guys last year, like a JJ McCarthy was going 107, 108 in rookie drafts. Bo Nix was like late round 1 pick. Michael Penix was like early round 2, mid round 2, but obviously that was like the built-in weird stuff where he goes to a team where they had just signed Kirk Cousins. And so like on one hand, they're getting worse draft capital. Cam Ward's potentially going number 1. But on the other hand, if they're similar caliber players and like similar as prospects, those other guys are going to far better situations where you have McCarthy going to the Vikings, you have Bo Nix going to the Broncos with Sean Payton, Michael Penix going to that Falcons offense, which, has a lot of strong building blocks compared to Cam Ward, who's probably going to be going to a pretty bad team, especially if someone is like moving into that spot, trading up, giving up future assets. Those are now picks or, players that are not going to be playing with Cam Ward moving forward. So it's like a weird dynamic. On Keep Trade Cut right now, Cam Ward is like valued as like a 5th round startup pick in the same area as guys like JJ McCarthy, Bryce Young, Jared Goff, Dak Prescott. I think it's interesting, conversations with some of those players. I'd pretty clearly take JJ McCarthy just based on the offense he's on. Like tough to see him not being at least solid, in that Vikings offense. Bryce Young's interesting because he was a number 1 pick, kind of similar to a potential Cam Ward situation where like on paper, didn't seem to have the highest ceiling just based on the lack of rushing upside, doesn't have like an otherworldly arm, right? Like the tools aren't sensational, but he was really putting it together towards the end of his second season. And then you have guys like Jared Goff, Dak Prescott, where you kind of know what you're getting out of them, but obviously they're veterans. the shelf life isn't going to be as long. So like you're taking the safety of those guys, or you're going to take like the unknown kind of longevity of a guy like Cam Ward. He's just a tough player to rank is kind of my overall point here. So right now he's number 5. I could see him moving up. Like if he goes number 1 and maybe some of these other guys don't get great draft capital, probably don't see him moving down a ton unless he just like, somehow falls out of like the top 3, which seems pretty unlikely at this point. So long spiel there for Cam Ward, but just another part of this very unique draft class. And then moving into tier 3, I'm actually going to have the tight ends back to back. So Colston Loveland is going to be my number 6, and then Tyler Warren is going to be my number 7. And I actually want to start off by talking about Tyler Warren here because I think some people are going to be surprised that I actually have Loveland ahead of him, but I am very in on both these guys. It's certainly not like a anti-Tyler Warren take here. He had a nuclear 2024, 104 receptions, 1,280 receiving yards, 8 receiving touchdowns, also added 26 carries for 218 rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns. He's an absolute unit, 6'5", 256. He's a monster after the catch, 7.7 and 6.7 yak per reception in his last 2 seasons. He's great in contested catch situations, 63.6% catch rate. The red flag here for Tyler Warren is that he broke out in year 5 and he is going to be 23 in May. Now, he does have a lot of built-in excuses when it just comes to the other tight ends that, he kind of overlapped with, where at his time at Penn State, he was sharing the tight end room with Pat Freiermuth, Brenton Strange, Theo Johnson, all guys currently in the NFL. In terms of his draft capital, seems like a lock to go round 1, probably going somewhere in the top 15. So I'm still very in on him here. I like him as like a mid-round rookie pick. Maybe it's kind of splitting hairs here, but I think him going like potential top 10 or top 15 might actually be a negative because say Tyler Warren goes, we're seeing Jets, we're seeing Colts. If he goes one of those landing spots, it's not great. A guy like Colston Loveland could then end up slipping to like a Broncos landing spot, which would obviously just be like amazing for the tight end position. So now let's kind of dig into Colston Loveland here. When you look at his raw numbers in 2024, it doesn't look all that special, but context is just so important because I talked about how Tyler Warren was an absolute monster. When you're looking at the percentage that these guys were of their passing offenses, they're pretty much like identical. They each had a 31% target share in the games they played in. Colston Loveland accounted for 39% of his team's passing yards in the games where he played or receiving yards. Tyler Warren was 37. So obviously you want the bigger chunk of the offense of just like the amazing overall offense, but Colston Loveland was a part of a really, really poor Michigan passing attack, and he was pretty much like their entire passing game. He is only 20 years old, turns 21 in April, so very young, very productive back-to-back seasons, had a 2.38 and 2.67 yards per route run in both those years. Still a big tight end, 6'5", 248. He's a smooth, efficient route runner. Definitely not close to Tyler Warren after the catch. I think both these guys are going to be really solid pros at the next level. And I think, in a class where maybe it isn't stacked at wide receiver, we still have some like running back draft capital questions. A guy like Shedeur Sanders, we don't know where he's going to go. I'm fine like taking the top tight end prospects as early as like the mid first round at this point. And then continuing on here with tier 3, I'm going with my wide receiver 2, Emeka Egbuka. He just feels like such a safe pick here. He has never been the best wide receiver on, any of his college teams. Played 4 seasons at Ohio State, was never the top guy. But it's because he's overlapping with just absolute studs. You have Jeremiah Smith, Marvin Harrison, JSN, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave. He's still someone who produced at a high level at an early age, had an over 3 yards per route run as a sophomore. I think he just has the great opportunity to be a target hog, play in the slot, and just deliver you a ton of wide receiver 2 seasons. And I think, could peak as like a back end wide receiver 1. He's also probably going to be going in the later first round, which, always comes with a lot of those fun landing spots in the back half of round 1. We've seen in recent seasons, like when these guys are able to step into good offenses, they're going to be able to produce at a higher level early on, which would be great for a guy like Emeka Egbuka. So he's my number 8. Next up at number 9, I have the wide receiver cornerback hybrid in Travis Hunter. And I talk about how this is a unique draft class. He is certainly the most unique player in this draft class because his range of outcomes are just so wide. And, you could say that about a lot of players where it's like, oh, they have a pretty high ceiling, but there's no guarantee they pan out. Pretty much never are you going to have a situation where someone's ceiling is like they're the best player from this rookie class and their floor is like they don't even play offense. Like that just doesn't happen, right? Everyone else's floor is like they just didn't pan out as a player at whatever position they came in as. For Travis Hunter, it's like he just might not play offense, which obviously would make him unstartable for fantasy. So you're certainly taking on that risk that he just ends up primarily being a corner and, isn't getting enough routes to be startable. I think a lot of people are leaning towards him like being a corner at the next level, and that's certainly possible. There have been a lot of reports that have backed that up, but it really just takes whatever team that takes him, probably in the top 4, to see him more as a wide receiver, or for them to even get out there in training camp and like he starts making plays, maybe he struggles a little bit at corner, and then all of a sudden he's primarily playing wide receiver. And I'm just kind of willing to lean into that risk because in terms of his wide receiver ability, he would be my wide receiver 1 in this class if I knew that was his only position. If he did not play corner, said I'm a wide receiver, he would be my wide receiver 1, and he would be my 102 behind Ashton Jeanty. He just has insane ball skills. Only 14% of his targets were contested in 2024, which is great, but he caught 65% of those contested targets, which is amazing. He's such a clean route runner, so shifty and explosive both before and after the catch. So I'm willing to lean into the risk. I think it was the Browns GM pretty much came out and said like they view him more as a wide receiver than a corner. And like I said, it just takes whatever team to draft him to like him at wideout, and all of a sudden he's a massive steal wherever you're getting him in your rookie drafts. And then my final player in tier 3 is going to be the guy that was throwing Travis Hunter the ball on offense. Shedeur Sanders here, quarterback out of Colorado. It seems like the offseason kind of started with Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders being like neck and neck. They were like a 1A, 1B, at least in terms of like how they were being talked about, their potential draft prospects. Today, as I'm recording this, it seems like Cam Ward is the clear-cut quarterback 1. Like, would be shocked if he falls out of the top 3. For Shedeur Sanders, it no longer seems like he is a lock to go in the top 5. And like I talked about with Cam Ward, like I'm not making these hot takes about quarterbacks. If the NFL is going to take him top 10, I'm going to be willing to draft him. What I'm going to look at is what I think his potential upside is, and he could be a very solid passer at the next level. What he's not going to have a ton of is rushing upside. It's fairly limited. So what is the overall ceiling, right? He's certainly not like a slam dunk quarterback prospect. The rushing is going to be limited. We're hearing maybe now he's going to start to slip. So if he ends up going, top 5, I'll probably have him higher than this. But right now, I think 10 is fair, somewhere within this tier 3. If you're going to take him higher, I don't hate it, especially if he's getting the draft capital, but we do have a lot of other studs here ahead of him. And then moving into tier 4, going to go back to the running back position where I have Quinshon Judkins, running back out of Ohio State. He was a massive winner from the combine. Potential some like athleticism questions, not that he was like a bad athlete or anything, but he went out, absolutely smashed it. 9.88 relative athletic score. Of like the pre-combine like top 5 running backs, I think there was a general consensus of like in no order, but like Jeanty, Henderson, Hampton, Judkins, and then Kaleb Johnson. Like I think those were kind of the consensus top 5. Judkins was pretty clearly outside my top 3. The 3 I already talked about. They were my top 3 heading into the combine. They are still my top 3, but I think Judkins definitely helped himself out. He has the workhorse build. He's a physical runner. He's effective in short yardage situations. He's a willing pass blocker. Does kind of lack some of the consistent explosive plays that some of the other running backs in this class do have. And statistically, like he's not great after contact, even though he is big. He's a unit. He's physical. He actually averaged under 3.4 yards after contact per attempt in all 3 of his college seasons. I expect him to get round 2 draft capital. Like at this point, seems like a long shot for him to go in round 1, but round 2 would be very solid. Right now, a back end round 1 pick for me. And then after him, we're going to have back-to-back wide receivers. The first one is going to be Matthew Golden, a wide receiver out of Texas. He was a massive winner from the combine. I think there were some athleticism concerns coming into it. He goes out there and his teammate Isaiah Bond was talking about how he was going to break the 40 record. And then Matthew Golden comes out and runs a 4.29 40. I think Bond's best was like a 4.39. I know personally, I was pretty shocked that Golden was faster than Bond. And like, it wasn't by like a super small margin, right? Like a 4.29 compared to a 4.39. There's a real difference there. He was someone who produced early on, was the wide receiver 2 at Houston as a true freshman when Tank Dell was there in his final season. He is a top tier route runner, had some of his best performances in the biggest games. The last 3 games of the 2024 season, he went 8 for 162 against Georgia. He went 7 for 149 and a touchdown against Arizona State. And then against Ohio State, he went 2 for 51 before leaving that one with an injury. I think after the combine, he's going to be a lock to go round 1. I talked about it with Egbuka. With these guys, they can get into like the mid to back end of round 1. There are a lot of fun potential landing spots out there. That's obviously going to help Matthew Golden out. And then the other wide receiver who I mentioned, it's Luther Burden. I'm probably going to be lower on him than consensus. I think he's a super fun player. Obviously dangerous with the ball in his hands, tested well at the combine. He had 6+ yak per reception in all 3 seasons. So he is truly a weapon. Had a monster sophomore season, kind of fell off this past year. My concern with Burden, first off, it seems like the round 1 hype is not going super well. Like a few weeks ago, it seemed like he was, very confidently going to go in round 1. Since then, probably looking more at round 2. I wouldn't be shocked if he went in the first, but I think Kuiper or Jeremiah both had him outside of the first round. And I do think he's just fairly landing spot dependent. Like you need a coach to kind of be intelligent, use him the right way, get him some manufactured touches. And when you look at this past season, right, he was underwhelming, was kind of neck and neck with Theo Weiss in terms of their production. And the common thing you hear is like, oh, he was misused. The coaching staff didn't use him properly. And that's kind of my concern, right? Like some of these other wide receivers, I don't really know if you can misuse them. For a guy like Luther Burden, if you can misuse him, that's certainly something that could then happen at the next level in the NFL. And if he's going from a back end round 1 pick where you have these competent organizations, good quarterback play, good situations, to now going earlier round 2 where you have questionable situations, like questionable coaching staffs, I do think that's kind of a hit to him here. And then my final player, I guess I have him like a slight tier below these other guys, but I did want to mention him. Kaleb Johnson out of Iowa. He's one of like the few running backs that didn't test insanely well. A ton of guys just had like amazing athletic testing. He ran a 4.5 840, which compared to some of the other studs in this class, like seems very slow. But the dude's 6'1", 224. Like it's not a terrible time. There are certainly plenty of NFL running backs that like didn't have amazing athletic testing and are still very solid. Guys like David Montgomery, Josh Jacobs, some of these bigger running backs that didn't blow it away in terms of their 40 time. He also didn't jump, which tells me he probably wasn't going to score super well there. He's kind of a unique runner. He is not someone who's going to really put his foot in the ground and make super sharp cuts, but he takes great angles, is able to shed tacklers. So he's not going to make guys miss super clean, but he's going to be able to kind of, force them off of him. I do think he plays faster and accelerates better than what that 40 time would say. I do think it was kind of surprising he ran there because on tape he does look faster than that. I think draft capital is going to be a question mark. Probably was looking pretty good to go round 2. Does that time scare people off? I don't think it's going to like tank him down boards or anything, but is he going round 3 now maybe instead of round 2? We'll have to wait and see. And then the other thing that makes me, feel fine kind of separating him from those other running backs is the lack of receiving production. He really had like 1 year of actually catching passes, and it wasn't anything crazy, right? He's a fairly limited route runner, not super advanced there. So I know some people are very high on him, would still be, fairly in on him if he got the draft capital, but right now he's just going to be a little bit out of round 1 for me. But that is going to wrap it up for like my early round 1 rankings. Would love to hear your thoughts. Who are you guys higher on, lower on? Let me know down below. But thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.